والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين والحمد لله رب العالمين أما بعد. Today inshallah we're talking about wiping footgear, what we call the khuf, most widely and famously known as the leather sock. So we have finished our subject on dry ablution, what we call in Arabic tayammum. So when you cannot find water or you're unable to use the water for whatever reason, we said that a person can do dry tayammum on something which is from the nature of the earth. Now we are moving on. As you can see, the subjects are similar, but also they are based on importance. When we started off with our overarching subject of cleanliness, we started off with talking about different types of water. Why? Because that is the key to cleaning anything. So we started off with which types of water are we able to use, and what makes water unable to be used for spiritual purification, and also what makes water itself impure. So we talked about that, then we moved on to talking about ghusl, and then we moved on to talking about ablution, because ghusl gets rid of the major impurities, ablution gets rid of the minor impurities, minor ritual impurities. And then we moved on to talking about tayammum, which is dry ablution. Reason being is that is the substitute of ablution if you cannot do ablution. And now we are moving on to what we call the khuf, the leather sock, which is what we call a rukhsa. You are allowed to, if you want, to wear a leather sock after getting wudu, so that you do not have to constantly keep washing your feet. Now this leather sock is valid for both. We're carrying on from the book now. It is valid for both a man and a woman, a traveler and a non-traveler. Okay, so anyone is allowed to wear this, whether they're traveling or not, to wipe the top of their footgear. Okay, now footgear, if we go down, Imam Tahawi writes, we consider valid the dispensation of wiping over footgear while residing or traveling, as narrated in authentic reports. The permissibility of wiping is established from well-known, what we like to call mashhur narrations, nearing the rank of mass-transmitted mutawatir. So it's so mashhur, it's so well-known that it's almost mutawatir, what we like to call mass-transmitted reports. For this reason, Karkhi said, I fear unbelief for anyone who rejects the wiping of footgear. This is how good the foundation for wiping the footgear is that it's based almost on mutawatir ahadith, which is considered to be something that you must believe in. So since it's almost mutawatir, he says, we don't say that someone goes into kufr or for denying it, but we do say, because it's completely mashhur and everyone knows this, it's basically one of the daruras of deen at this stage. Wiping footgear is permissible whilst washing the feet is superior. Alternatively, one may say wiping footgear is a dispensation, what we call, what I said in the beginning, a rukhsa, dispensation, you're allowed to do it. And washing the feet is strictness, azima. Okay, so the creed of Imam Tahawi, Aqidatul Tahawiyya, and Rad. Whenever you see Rad in this book, it means Raddul Muhtar, Raddul Muhtar is this book here. There's about 14 volumes of this. So this is volume 1. This will talk about cleanliness. Yes, so over here. Maybe one day I should make a lesson on how to decipher these books. So here's the title. This would be the name of, if it's a hashir, it'll be the name of the hashir. If it's a sharh, it'll be the name of the sharh. And then it would say ala. So what is it explaining? Which book is it written upon? So Raddul Muhtar is written on Durrul Mukhtar. And then it will give you the author. It'll give you the author and also who's added notes and footnotes. And if there's a translator, who's the translator, and it'll tell you which maktab published the book. On the spine, usually you'll have a nice decoration. On the top, it'll usually tell you the author's name. So over here it says Ibn Abidin. I know you can't see it. It'll have a 1. So this is volume 1. And that number 1 will also be towards the bottom here. Some publishers publish 2. Once a publisher might just publish 1, but they'll always have the volume here. And right at the bottom, they'll have the publisher again, the maktab. So this is Raddul Muhtar. This is 14 volumes. It's written by who? Ibn Abidin. And the book we're reading now, this is the translation, the Sublime Gift. Ibn Abidin's son wrote the book which we're reading now. So his father wrote 14 volumes. He's one of he's a big alim of the Hanafi madhab in the 1800s. So he's very recent. His father did 14 volumes of Raddul Muhtar, and then his son, when he got his father's work, the 14 volumes, and he compressed it, made it concise into the book we're reading now. And that's why in this book almost every footnote will be from Raddul Muhtar, because this book is shrinking Raddul Muhtar. So any information that we're going to add will almost always be from Raddul Muhtar, the original book. Also, another quick, usually the last 1 or 2 volumes of these really long volume books. So I won't show it now, but usually if you have like a 14 volume book, the last volume will actually be the contents. So you'll get usually like a really thin final volume. That's not that they couldn't fit it in to the other volumes. They put that volume there on purpose. It's actually not a volume, it's just the contents of all the 14 volumes. So if you're looking for something in an Arabic book and it's got 14 volumes, you don't have to pick them all off the shelf and start looking for the contents. Just pick the last volume out. Usually that'll be the contents. Okay. So we said a man, a woman, a traveler, non-traveler, so anybody at any stage can wipe the foot gear. Obviously there's conditions to this. Or to wipe foot gear on 1 foot for someone who only has 1 foot. Obviously, if someone only has 1 foot, they're allowed to wear leather socks on, leather sock on 1 foot and wipe that. Whilst in a state of minor, pay attention to this, minor ritual impurity. Okay, you cannot use it for ghusl. Okay, the foot gear may be manufactured from something thick. It doesn't have to be leather. So that is if they are not made from leather, as is typically the case, right? It doesn't have to be made of leather, like cotton yarn, wool, felt, broadcloth, or thick white cotton fabric. Okay, now there are conditions. How thick does it have to be? If the below conditions are met, regardless of whether the sole is made from leather or not, even if the sole isn't made from leather, it can still be allowed. You just need to make sure that it meets the conditions. Okay, so there are 9 conditions. Don't be scared of the number. Some of them are just common sense things, right? So you need to put on the footgear after washing both your feet, or something that takes the ruling of washing both the feet. Okay? So if your foot is injured, remember what we said. Instead of washing, you'll wipe it. But that doesn't mean you can't wear a leather sock. That means that wiping for you, because your foot is injured, is in place of washing. So for you, you've washed your feet just by wiping it. For example, by wiping a cast worn on both feet, or wiping a cast on one foot and washing the other foot. Thereafter, one wears footgear over the cast and wipes the footgear for as long as the excuse exists during the prescribed period for wiping. This is because wiping the cast has the same legal ruling as washing. Like we said, if you're injured, if you have a cast, right, for you, washing is wiping. One may put on footgear before completing ablution on the condition that ablution is completed. Okay, so you must complete your ablution. You can, for example, in the Hanafi madhab, like we said, you can mix and you can mess up the order. Obviously, it's against the sunnah to do that, but your wudu is still valid. If you wash your feet and then wear the leather socks and then complete the wudu, that's fine. And obviously, how can you complete a wudu? Is if nothing happens in between, which would normally break your wudu. Okay, so even if it took you 2 hours to get wudu, as long as during those 2 hours nothing happened that would break your wudu, so then you would have wudu. If something happened that would normally break your wudu, right, nullify your wudu, then you would have to start from the beginning again. You'd have to wash your feet again. So you have to wash your feet. So basically you have to have wudu and then wear the khuf, okay? Or wash your feet, wear the khuf, but complete your wudu. So you must complete your wudu. Second, the footgear covers the ankles from all sides, okay? It can't be short. It needs to cover the ankles from all sides. That's why we say shoes definitely don't work. Boots, we'll get to boots, okay? But boots can work. It's just you need to make sure that you don't ever take them off. And how are you going to pray in boots? The boots need to be able to bend your toes in salah. Because for us, in the Hanafi madhab, in sajda, both your feet need to be touching the ground. So we say you need to have a minimum of 6 toes on the ground. Otherwise, your salah is invalid. 6 toes for a normal person. There is no impropriety in the foot being visible from above or being visible to an extent less than the size of a hole that prohibits wiping of the footgear. Okay, so the foot needs to cover the ankle from all sides, not just one side, right? It needs to completely cover it. Now, it's okay if you can see the foot from above, as long as the hole, or whatever it's a hole, right? As long as the hole isn't too big, and for that we say three fingers, like this, right? 3 fingers big. As long as the hole isn't this big, then it's allowed. You can see the foot. So being able to see the foot isn't a problem. Being able to walk in the footgear continually in a normal manner for 1 farsakh. So it needs to be durable, okay? 1 farsakh is approximately 1.5 hours walking distance, okay? And 3 Hashamite miles, if you remember, that was about 2 kilometers, we said, more or less, 1.8 to 2 kilometers. So that would be about 6 kilometers, okay? So it has to be durable, but it doesn't have to be made out of metal. right? It just has to last 6 kilometers or 1.5 hours of walking, which a lot of materials nowadays can easily do, as long as it's thick enough. And we're talking about not on carpet, we're talking about outside, real world walking. So on stone, on rock, on concrete, on asphalt, it's all the same. So you need to be able to walk in it or more without hardship, okay? So it should be in normal footwear, okay? It shouldn't be like a box on your foot, without wearing shoes on top, okay? So we're talking about the durability here. It is not permissible to wipe footgear manufactured from wood or iron, right? You're not allowed to do that. Each of the 2 items of footgear is devoid of a hole greater than the size of 3 smallest toes, okay? So a small toe will be more or less about as big as your pinky. We're not talking lengthwise, right? We're talking about width. So 3 of these, like just a bit smaller than this then, basically. A hole that big, okay? So 3 small toes, as long as it doesn't have a hole that big, you're allowed to use it. So sometimes people may think that with the leather sock, the stitches, right? If you pull them, you can see inside the leather, or water is able to pass through. So they ask, is this still waterproof? Because the leather itself is waterproof, but where it's been stitched, water can seep through, or those stitches can be stretched and you can literally see your foot. So we say that's fine because those are really small holes. And when it comes to the foot being wet, as long as half the foot doesn't get soaked with water, you can still use the leather sock, and that's fine. The footgear holds onto the foot without being tied. This is important, okay? So this is why most boots won't actually work, because a lot of boots require them to be tied. If you were to completely remove the laces from the boot, okay, and try to walk in it, remember, you need to be able to walk in it without hardship, okay? So if you were to get the boot, completely remove the laces, those boots would fall off your feet, or they wouldn't cover your ankles, okay? That's why normal shoes don't work anyways, because they don't cover your ankles. Boots cover your ankles, but they require it to be tied, okay? Now, if you do find a boot which fits on your foot without having to be tied, which covers your ankles, obviously it's going to be durable, okay? Then you may use that as a leather sock, for example. However, like we said, you need to be able to bend your toes in salah. So when you go into sajda, you need to be able to make sure that your toes are facing the qibla. That's how we do sajda, okay? So when you're doing sajda, you need to make sure that your toes are being bent, because that's how we say, okay, if you can bend your toes, then we say that your toes are touching the floor. If you can't bend your toes, then we say your toes are in the air. Your shoe might be touching the floor, but your toes, you're unable to bend them, conform, right? So we say that's not allowed. So if you can find a boot which is thin, where you can bend your toes, it covers your ankles, it stays on your foot without being tied, then there's no reason why you can't do mess on top of it. That's why in the question asked last time on Thursday, I said that I might be able to understand the people that say wipe your shoes, because there is, conditions that need to be met, but it is possible. But wiping the hijab on top of somebody's head, I said that completely has no, it's unprecedented. It doesn't have an example. When being wiped, the footgear prevents water reaching the foot. It needs to be water resistant, not waterproof. It doesn't have to be waterproof. It needs to prevent it. It doesn't need to completely, it needs to make it difficult for water to touch the foot. But it doesn't need to be completely waterproof. For example, wool. Wool absorbs the water, right? So it needs to be thick enough where when you wipe it, your foot doesn't get wet. But wool isn't waterproof. So if you were to wipe it enough, right, eventually that water would reach your foot. So it needs to be water resistant, not waterproof. Due to its thickness, it does not absorb water. And when we say absorb water, wool is always going to absorb water, right? So we understand that as absorb water to the foot. So if we went to 243, according to Maidani, it is not a condition that the foot gear is absolutely waterproof against water that is poured upon it, right? So you don't have to put it under a sink and check that way. Okay, rather when somebody wipes upon it, it should be thick enough so that water does not reach the foot almost immediately, right? Others understood the condition to mean that the socks should be thick enough so that they do not absorb water at all times. Okay, so there is a difference in opinion here, but what we can say is that it just needs to be thick so that your foot doesn't immediately get wet. That seeps through to the feet. As for socks, okay, so that was foot gear and this is socks. As long as the conditions are the same, we might as well call them the same thing, right? As for socks, Jawrab, they should not be so thin as to make what is beneath visible, or so transparent as to not conceal what is behind. Okay, so socks may be wiped upon when they meet the same conditions. Okay, so can you wipe socks? Yeah, only if they meet the same conditions. So they need to stay on your foot, they need to be comfortable, they need to last for 6 kilometers walking on concrete, rocks, asphalt, whatever, outside conditions basically, on soil, on sand, and they need to be water resistant. So as long as this is the case, then for example socks made out of cotton can be worn, or wool, thick wool can be worn, and they can be wiped upon. Imam Muhammad specifically mentioned that they should be thick and do not absorb water. Also see discussion on the permissibility of wiping on socks. Abul Asl. An area from the front part of the foot that is the size of 3 smallest fingers of the hand remains in the foot gear. So another condition is remains in the foot gear if the front part of the feet has been lost. No one does not wipe foot gear even if the back part of the feet remains. So this is talking about somebody with an injury, a foot injury. Okay, the front part of the foot, which is the size of the 3 smallest fingers, right, of the hand, remains in the foot gear. Okay, so if we were to imagine the foot in half, okay, the front part, yeah, the front half of the foot, you need at least 3 of these. So about more or less this much of your foot needs to remain for you to be able to wear a leather sock on it. Okay, anything less than that, we say you don't have a foot, basically, your foot, because remember, it's always about half. If you've lost like 50% of your foot, you've lost all your foot. If the front part of the feet has been lost, one does not wipe foot gear. Okay, you can still wear it, obviously, but you don't wipe it, even if the back part of the feet remain. Okay, so if you've lost like majority of your foot, na'udhu billah, may Allah protect us, then you don't need to wipe your foot gear. So this is like, you don't really need to know this one. This is for very special cases. The current state of purification has not been attained by dry ablution. Okay, so the condition is that your ablution should not have been dry ablution. Okay, if one puts on foot gear after attaining purity by dry ablution, so tayammum, and thereafter finds water, wiping foot gear is not permissible, rather one washes the feet. Okay, so if you've got tayammum, you can't wear leather socks. Okay, you can't wipe on top of them. This is because purification attained by dry ablution is incomplete, and one may only wipe footgear when complete purification has been attained. Again from Raddul Muhtar. Okay. So the one wiping is not in a state of major ritual impurity. Okay. Like we said already, it's only for minor ritual impurity. If you have major ritual impurity, you need to take off everything and have a shower. So these were the 9 conditions for wiping the socks. So if we were to quickly recap, we said you need to have wudu when you wear the leather socks, okay? And then the next couple of them were to do with the materials and the shape, right? So we said it needs to cover the ankles. You need to be able to walk in it, so it needs to be durable. It needs to not have a hole in it. It needs to hold on to the foot without being tied. It needs to prevent water. So this is all materials and durability, okay? So as long as you've bought a proper mest, you can forget about these ones, okay? All you need to be worried about is having wudu when you wear it, and for there not to be a hole in it, okay? As long as you've got wudu when you wear it and there's no hole in it, you're fine. You need to make sure that you've got enough feet. You need to make sure that you didn't get tayammum, you got wudu, and you need to make sure that it's not ghusl and that you're getting wudu with the leather socks. So like I said, don't be afraid of the 9 conditions. Most of these you can completely forget about them. Just remember that you need wudu when you put it on, and that it needs to be durable, waterproof, and without holes, without big holes. The non-traveler may wipe for a day and a night. So we're talking about hours here, 24 hours. And the traveler for 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours. The beginning of this period is considered from the commencement of the first minor ritual impurity. So it doesn't start when you wear the socks. When does the timer start ticking? The 24 hours, for example. So if you're a non-traveler, 24 hours. If you're a traveler, because to make it easier for you, 3 days, 3 nights, 72 hours, okay? So you can keep those on for 3 days and keep wiping on them until the 3rd day ends. And then on the 4th day, you must remove them and get wudu again and then wear them again for another 3 days. So the non-traveler, when does the 24 hours start ticking down? Not when you wear it. You've already worn it, okay? You've got your wudu, you've worn it. The first time your wudu breaks, is nullified, okay? So the first time you go to the toilet or when you start bleeding, okay? So the second your wudu becomes nullified, that is when the 24 hours starts ticking. So in reality, a traveler could wear their leather socks for about 40 hours. So if they had just worn it, okay, and let's say they're fasting, they don't go to the toilet or anything for about 16 hours, okay, and then their wudu breaks, okay, that's when the 24 hours starts. Understood? So a non-traveler, they can wipe for a day or night after their wudu has broken. Again, traveler, 3 days, 3 nights after their wudu has broken. Okay, so that's when the countdown starts. That's very important to remember. So what if somebody sleeps? Because when you sleep, your wudu is broken, right? I call it broken, call it nullified, whatever you want to call it, okay? It's just, we say broken in Arabic, in Turkish. So that's why I say your wudu is broken. So if you sleep, is your wudu broken in the beginning of your sleep or at the end? Because if it's the end, then you get an extra like 8 hours or however long you slept. If one sleeps, the commencement of the period is the moment one falls asleep. Not when you wake up, but when you fell asleep, okay? Not upon awakening. Accordingly, if one sleeps, becomes insane or unconscious for the entire 24 hours or the 72-hour period, the wiping is invalidated. Why? Because that 24 hours started ticking the second you lost consciousness. If the non-traveler, okay, so a person that can only do it for 24 hours, wipes the footgear and then travels, okay, so you've wiped the footgear and then you've started traveling, before the expiry, right? So let's say 20 hours, and then you started traveling. He completes the traveler's period. Okay, so it gets upgraded to 72 hours. Okay, minus whatever he's already done. So 20 hours. So it would be 72 minus 20. That would be 52 hours left on the duration. If the traveler becomes a non-traveler, he completes 24 hours. This is very important. People forget this. So if you've been wearing them for 2 days and then you arrive home with wudu, right? And you're like, oh, it's time for Asr, you can't pray. Because the second you arrived home, or you arrived in Liverpool, okay, wherever you're living, I'm in Liverpool. The second you arrive in Liverpool, because you've had those on your feet for 48 hours and you're no longer a traveler, your wudu is invalid. So remember that when you arrive, if it's been more than 24 hours, your wudu is invalid. The minimum area that must be wiped once from the top of the front of each foot is the surface area in height and width of one's 3 smallest fingers. Okay, so when we're wiping the leather socks, how much do we have to wipe minimum? And which part of the foot do we have to wipe? The answer is the top of the foot, the front portion, top of the foot, okay, is what we wipe. And the minimum we have to wipe is 3 fingers of the hand in both the width and the height, okay? So the easiest way to wipe properly would be just to place 4 fingers onto the khuf and to wipe like that. Because then you're guaranteed to have done 3 fingers because you're wiping with 4 fingers. If water or rain comes into contact with the minimum area of the foot that must be wiped, this suffices. So your hands don't have to actually touch the khuf. Okay, remember what we said? Cleaning is superior to wiping. Washing is superior to wiping. So if for whatever reason your khufs got washed, okay, if you stepped in a clean puddle and they got completely wet, the outside of it, not the inside, then this would be fine. All right, if water or rain comes into contact with the minimum area of the foot that must be wiped, this suffices. The sunnahs of wiping footgear include passing fingers while spreading apart from the tips of the toes until the shin. So the sunnah way of doing it, so we already said the minimum is 3 fingers, this much. As long as you wipe this much of the khuf, that's fine. The sunnah way is you start from the toes of the foot with your fingers a bit separated. You're wiping with the fingers, right? You start from the toes and you go up, okay, until the shin, all right, up until the ankles, basically. And that is how you wipe. Now, having leather socks on, you need to also make sure that there are a couple of things you don't do, okay? So there's already everything that nullifies ablution will nullify your ablution again, okay? But there are some extra things now that might nullify your ablution or nullify what we call the mess. You might not have to go get wudu again, but you might have to wash your feet again, okay? So everything that nullifies ablution nullifies your ablution again. Removing the footgear, okay? Even if it is only one of them, or the footgear falls off by itself, and most of your foot leaves it, okay? So if it just fell down the ankle a little bit and you pulled it back up, that's fine. But if a majority of your foot left it, okay, then we count that as it has been removed. Remember, 50% is important in Islam. Okay, so if your majority of your foot, 51% has left the khuf, then we say that your whole foot has left the horizontal part of the footgear and moves into the shin of the footgear. So it doesn't have to completely have left the footgear, because you know how it has the shape of a foot. There's the shin part and then there's the foot part. If half of the foot part enters the shin part, okay, then we say that it has been taken off, even though technically you've still got it on your foot. Similarly, deliberately removing a majority of the heel into the shin of the foot gear nullifies the wiping. However, wiping is not nullified by a majority of the heel inadvertently moving into the shin area. So if you do it on purpose, then just the shin is enough. Okay, sorry, just the heel is enough. But if it happens by accident, the heel's not enough. The majority of the foot must happen. Okay, so we're more lenient if it's an accident. If you do it on purpose, we say the heel will nullify the wiping. What does that mean? That means you must remove it. And we're talking about both feet, because you never only do one foot. You must remove the leather socks from both feet. You must wash your feet again, and then you must wear them again if you have ablution. If you don't have ablution, then you must remove them, get ablution, and then wear them again. Okay? And you're not allowed to pray until you do that. Okay? So water coming into contact with a majority of one or both feet. Like we said, it has to be water resistant. So a little bit of water might get through. That's fine. You might have a tiny hole. Like we said, you're allowed to have 3 toes, 3 small toes worth of holes in your mess. Okay, in your khuf. So obviously water will get in through those holes. But as long as the majority of your foot doesn't get soaked with water, okay, doesn't get wet, then we say that's fine. But if more than 50% of your foot gets wet, then we say you have to remove your leather socks, wash your feet, and then wear it again. Expiration of the maximum time period for wiping. Okay, so let's say the 24 hours ran out, or the 72 hours ran out. What do? If you've got ablution, you remove your khuf, you wash your feet, you wear your khuf again. If you don't have ablution, you remove the khuf, get ablution, then wear the khuf again. Even if one has not yet wiped the foot gear. Okay, this is unless one fears with compelling surety the loss of the feet due to severe cold. Okay, unless you're wearing the khuf to protect yourself from the cold, you must remove it and wash your feet and then wear it again. Okay. So, even if one has not yet wiped the foot gear, remember, the timer starts when your ablution is nullified, not when you wipe on them. Okay? So even if you've never even wiped on it, if it's been 24 hours, then the timers run out and you need to take them off and then wash your feet and then put them back on. A hole in the foot gear that is large enough to be prohibitive. Okay? So if a hole opens up in your mess, then you must remove it. Okay, and you can't use that same one again. 3 small toes, remember. Or thinness of the same size, such that it is not possible to walk in the foot gear for the remaining period of wiping. Okay? So what does this mean? That means that it's not a hole hasn't opened up, but let's say you were wearing something that's not leather, and you were wearing something made out of maybe wool. Okay? So like we said, the wool needs to be thick, but as you walk, what's going to happen? It's going to get thinner and thinner and thinner. Once it basically becomes thin like a normal sock, we count that as basically a hole, right? Because it's no longer meeting the condition. So it might as well be a hole. So we say it's either there's a hole that is large enough to be prohibitive, or there's a thinness of the same size, again, 3 small toes. Okay? If the legally excused person puts on foot gear, what does legally excused person mean? We said if someone's constantly bleeding and they can't get wudu, what they do is they wait until the last about 15-20 minutes of salah. Okay? They wait until that point, and then even though they're bleeding, they get their wudu and they pray. Okay? And if this happened for a whole salah time, then we say this person's now legally excused. So if for that same reason they can still get wudu after every salah time, they need to get wudu. They can't get wudu before the salah time, because with the salah time entering, their wudu is nullified. Okay, sorry, with the salah time exiting, their wudu is nullified. So they need to wait until the salah time exits and then get wudu. Okay. The reason we say exit is for Fajr, because there's no salah after Fajr. So after Fajr is over, you must get wudu again if you want to pray nafila, for example. So this is the legally excused person. They're getting wudu, but they're getting wudu with something that is normally not allowed. Okay, because they're bleeding, or they're actively having urine drips coming out of them. Okay, they've got incontinence. So, if a legally excused person puts on footgear whilst his excuse is present, so he's actively bleeding, for example. So he's actively bleeding. The expiry of the ritual prayer's prescribed time nullifies wiping. The expiry of a ritual prayer's prescribed time. So when the time goes out, okay, so when the time ends, what did we say? His wudu is nullified, okay? For this person, it also nullifies his wiping. What does that mean? That means he must remove his khuf and he must get wudu again, okay? Why? Because his original wudu isn't perfect. So basically, he's not allowed to wipe on the khuf if the salah time ends. If the salah time doesn't end and his wudu, so from this what we sort of understand is if his wudu is broken for any other reason, he can wipe on it. But if his wudu is nullified because of the end of the time, then he must remove the khuf and wear them. So there's no point in wearing it, basically. Upon the healing of a wound, for someone who performs ablution, wipes on a cast, puts on footgear, and subsequently the wound heals. Okay? So, if someone had a wound, right? So instead of washing their foot, they wiped it, and then they wore the leather sock. Okay? If that wound heals, then they must remove their khuf, wash their feet, and then wear the khuf again. Okay? Why? Because they had an excuse, and that excuse expired. It ran out, yeah? So upon the healing of a wound, for someone who, what have they done? They got ablution, they wiped on the cast, and then they put on the footgear. But now their foot's healed. So they don't have that excuse anymore. So they must remove their khuf, wash their feet, and then put the khuf back on. Okay? If one removed footgear, a majority of the feet become... So, if one removed footgear, a majority of the feet became wet. The maximum time period for wiping expired. A prohibitive hole arose, or the wound in the cast healed. It suffices to wash the feet alone. Like we said, for all of the things basically we talked about here, right? It says, if any of those happened, do you need to get ablution again? No, as long as you've already got ablution, all you need to do is wash your feet and wear the khuf again. Okay, if you didn't have ablution, obviously you're going to have to get ablution and then wear the khuf, because that's the condition for the khuf. It is not permissible to wipe over a turban, a cap, lady's face veil or gloves, or let's add a hijab or anything. You're not allowed to wipe over anything else. It does not exist. Okay, it only exists for footwear. It doesn't exist for headwear, facewear, bodywear, anything else. Okay, it doesn't matter if you wear leather gloves. You cannot just wipe your hands. It doesn't matter if you wore a leather cap. Okay, you cannot just wipe the leather cap. This isn't something that we can do analogy on and make up our own Islamic leather gear to wipe upon. Okay, the only reason we're allowed to do this is because we saw the Prophet ﷺ do it. Okay, if we had no narrations of the Prophet ﷺ doing this, we would never allow it, because we wouldn't have any narrations of it. The only reason we're allowed to do this is because we've got narrations that the Prophet ﷺ did this. Okay, and like we said, it's almost mutawatir. It's almost mass transmitted. So wiping on casts is quite similar, although it doesn't have nearly as much conditions as wiping on leather socks. Okay, so a cast is when you hurt yourself, right? And the doctors put your arm or your leg or your foot into a cast so that the bone heals. When undergoing a venesection or a limb is broken and it is bandaged or placed in a cast and the limb cannot be washed, even with hot water if it is available to one, or wiped with water, okay? So the limb cannot be washed or wiped. You're not allowed to get it wet, basically. It is mandatory to wipe a majority of that which is fastened to the limb, okay? So the limb can't be wiped. So you need, if you can't wash the limb and you can't wipe the limb, what do you need to do? You need to wipe the cast, not the limb, okay? So you're not allowed to wash your arm. You're not allowed to wipe your arm. So you must now do what? You need to wipe the cast. And how much do you need to wipe? Is 3 fingers enough? No. What does it say? Majority. Okay. So if it's a whole arm cast, right, up until the wrist usually, right? In fact, it's up until the fingers. Usually they'll even cover like the palm bit. So the fingers can move, right? But usually the cast will be all the way up until the elbow. You need to wipe a majority of that. This isn't enough. Okay? You need to make sure 50% of that cast you wipe. Might as well do 100% to make sure, yeah? So you need to wipe a majority. So just because we said wipe, and this is why we should be careful of trying to teach people Islam if we don't know it ourselves. Okay? So a person might have asked you, I've broken my arm, it's in a cast, how do I get wudu? And if you just told them to wipe it, but you never told them how much, okay? How are they going to know they need to wipe the majority of it? Because you've made it sound like it's only just to wipe it one time, right? But that's not true. You need to wipe the majority of it. So you need to make sure if you're teaching someone Islam that you're adding these little facts, or you're just sending them to an imam. Send them to an imam. It's not your problem. It's not your job to teach people, okay? Just send them to somebody who knows. Give them a phone number. Let them ask. Get it out of you. Make sure it's not a you problem, okay? Because the Prophet ﷺ says the person, obviously meaning wise, I'm not narrating the hadith word by word. Meaning wise, the hadith says, those of you bravest to the fire of hell are those bravest to give fatwas. Okay? So the bravest one to give rulings, the bravest one to say it's haram, it's halal, it's allowed, it's sunnah, it's wajib, it's fard. So the bravest of you at giving fatwa is the bravest to Jahannam, right? Because if you get it wrong, what happens? People follow you. So make sure that you're not giving any fatwas. If you know it 100%, then explain it. If you don't, even if you have a tiny bit of doubt, don't even bother. If removing the bandage is harmful, it suffices to wipe body parts visible between the dressings worn on the affected area. Okay? The same applies if one is unable to reapply the dressing oneself and cannot find another person to do so. Okay? So, if removing the bandage is going to be harmful, which majority of the time it will be harmful, okay, it suffices just to wipe the body parts which is visible between the dressing. But now they do such a good job that there won't be any body parts visible. And because there's no body parts visible, what do? You wipe the cast, majority of the cast. Okay? So the differences between wiping on a cast and wiping on footgear. There are less conditions on wiping on a cast. Why? Because it's not something you've done intentionally, right? Wiping a cast is like washing that which is beneath. Okay, it counts as washing. Hence, it is not time bound. All right, there is no 24 hours, 72 hours. Rather, it ends upon the healing of the wound. Once the wound is healed, then you must obviously stop wiping. It is not a condition that the cast or its like is fastened in a state of ritual purity. Okay, so you don't need to have wudu when the cast has been put on in the Hanafi madhab. In the Shafi'i madhab, from what I've heard, this is a condition. So if a Shafi is about to get a cast done, they need to definitely get wudu first and then get the cast done. But in the Hanafi madhab, it's not a condition. 3. It is permissible to wipe a cast on one foot whilst washing the other foot. Remember we said you can't do that with khuf. You always do both feet. So with the khuf, you can't just have khuf on one foot. You need to either have khuf on both or you need to have nothing on both. But with a cast, obviously if only one foot is broken, you're going to wipe that foot and wash the other. But you can't do that with a khuf. If the cast, bandage or ointment falls off the body, okay, before the healing of the wound, so your arm's still broken but the cast fell off, okay, it does not invalidate the wiping because your excuse is still there. Remember, a cast is an excuse. Leather socks or a khuf is a rukhsa. You're allowed to do it. But the cast, that's a complete excuse. And you've still got that excuse as long as you're injured. It is permissible to change the cast for another one. And it is not mandatory to wipe the new one. Although it is nice to do so. Okay. So let's say you wiped the cast. You've got your wudu. And then you changed it out for another one. You don't need to wipe the new one. Okay. But if it were to be leather socks, the second you take off that leather sock, you need to wash your feet. But with the cast, even if it falls off or if you change it with another cast, you don't have to renew the wiping. For wiping on casts and that which takes the same ruling, okay, a bandage upon an ulcer or a place from which blood was let or it was cauterized, okay, there is no difference between the one in a state of minor or major ritual impurity. Remember what we said with the khuf? You're not allowed to use it for major ritual impurity. But with a cast, it's not like you have a choice. Okay? We're not going to say take it off and just let water flow all over your wound. It doesn't matter if it's minor or major. With a cast, you wipe the cast, majority of it. Remember, keep that majority in your head because that's not something everybody knows. For wiping on casts and that which takes the same ruling, e.g. a bandage upon an ulcer, so we already read this, sorry. If the cast falls off from a healed wound, okay, and one is ritually pure, okay, so you've got wudu and then it falls off. It is mandatory to wash only the place where the cast was, okay. However, if one fears loss of the foot due to cold, dry ablution is performed, okay. Ignore these sentences. Those are for like really cold areas, okay? So if the cast falls off and you've already got wudu, all you have to do is wash where the cast fell off. How is this different from the khuf? The difference of the khuf is if, for example, the 24 hours had run out, what would you have to do? You would have to take the khuf off both feet. Let's say it fell off one foot, you would have to again take it off for both feet. And you would have to wash your feet. So that is the difference between this and that. So with this, you only have to wash the part which healed, okay, the part which was covered. With the khuf, even if it comes off your right foot, you need to take the one off your left foot also and wash that, okay? But if, for example, with the cast, if it was your right arm, you would only wash your right arm. You wouldn't have to wash your left arm. Understand? So that's the difference between, we're still talking about the difference between the khuf and the cast. If one wipes a cast and then fastens another one on top, it is permissible to wipe the top one. So it doesn't matter how thick it is, okay? As long as there's a wound, you can make the cast as thick as you want. If the water enters beneath the cast, the wiping is not invalidated. When in fact, this isn't the case for khuf. If water gets in, if more than half your foot gets wet, then your wiping is invalidated. Also with the top one, you can't wear two khufs on top of each other. You can only wear one, right? It is not a condition for the cast to completely cover the area of the wound. Okay? It doesn't need to completely cover your wound. You might have just wrapped half of your broken arm, but that's fine. Okay? But with the khuf, you need to cover completely your foot up until the ankles and including the ankles. And it does not prevent water from, it doesn't have to prevent water from penetrating. Okay? Gauze, we call it gauze. That doesn't stop water from penetrating. In fact, it's meant to suck up blood from the wound. So if you were to wet it from the top, that would allow water in. Okay? Because that's another difference between the cast and the leather socks. The leather socks have to be water resistant. The cast doesn't have to be. It does not need to hold on to the limb without being tied. Okay? But the khuf does. Wiping is not invalidated by a large hole, but with the khuf, it is invalidated, and it is valid to fasten a cast on any limb. But with the khuf, you're only allowed to put it on your feet. Okay, so those were the differences between the khuf and the cast. So, wiping is permissible in the following cases if one is able to do so. However, it is omitted if it is harmful. Okay? If one's eyes are inflamed and it is harmful to wash the exterior of the eyelids, then you can just wipe it. If wiping is also going to harm you, then you don't touch it. A nail is broken and one has applied ointment. Okay, so let's say you've broken a nail. We're not talking about the long nails. We're talking about you've broken a nail and it's in you've applied you've applied ointment so that it doesn't get infected. So we're talking about a wound, an injury. Okay? So you've applied ointment, and if you wash your nail, what's going to happen? The ointment's going to disappear. You're allowed to just wipe it. But if wiping it's also going to cause problems, then you don't even wash it. Okay? So even for a nail injury, okay? Even for a nail injury, we say that you don't have to wash it. Okay? Ointment or a piece of gallbladder skin has been applied to cracked heels to block harmful water or the like, and removing it is harmful. So you'll see this with some elderly people, their heels, from all of the wudu that they've been doing their whole lives, the ablution they've been doing, their heels have become cracked. Okay? So if these people were to apply an ointment or a piece of gallbladder skin, okay, which is a treatment for it, right? Or they applied, for example, nowadays they applied something waterproof. They applied Vaseline. Vaseline is waterproof, right? They applied Vaseline onto the heel. They don't need to remove it for salah. Why? Because it's there for a reason. What's the reason it's there? It's to stop the heel from getting damaged even more, right? Because if you allow it to get damaged even more, then you won't be able to walk on your foot anymore. It'll be so painful. Your foot's literally cracking, right? It's very painful. That's why they don't have to allow water to touch it. Wiping footgear, casts, and the head does not require an intention. Okay? So in the Hanafi madhab, neither of these three things requires a separate intention. Okay, so we'll stop here. The legally excused person. This is very important. It's important for two reasons. One, it'll most likely have already happened to you at least once in your life. Okay, maybe a couple of times, especially for those going through puberty, and because in the Hanafi madhab, bleeding causes the ablution to be nullified. So those teenagers that are having spots come up all over their body, right? I had this when I was going through puberty. I had spots everywhere. I was constantly bleeding. I used to take off my vest at the end of the day. There was blood on my vest because of the spots that were coming out from my back. This causes a lot of problems. Okay, so there is a way of becoming legally excused in the Hanafi madhab. Okay, so you don't have to jump ship and become Shafi'i just because you're bleeding. Okay, some people do that, and that's why I say it's important for two reasons. One, it's going to happen to you, and two, you don't have to go to the Shafi'i madhab to find the solution. We've got the solution in the Hanafi madhab. Okay, inshallah. So we'll stop here.